Hello, everyone. I hope everybody can hear us and can see the shared screen. Welcome to the webinar titled 5 Practical Ways to Influence Managers for Voice of Customer Success. My name is Alyona Medelyan, and I'm dialing in all the way from New Zealand today. It's 8 a.m. And with me, I have Lynn. Lynn, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yes, I'm happy to be here, Alyona. Thank you very much. My name is Lynn Hunsaker. I'm head of customer and co-founder of ClearAction Continuum, and I've written quite a lot of articles, upwards of 300. You'll find me as one of the top authors on customerthink.com, and I was leading customer experience strategy and transformation for many years at Applied Materials and Sunoco.
Great. And you're based in California, right?
That's right. I'm calling from Silicon Valley today.
Cool. I'm so glad you could join us. And a little bit of my background, I'm the CEO of Thematic. And what we do is we help companies analyze customer feedback to tell them how they can improve customer experience. And I reached out to Lynn because I read several articles on customer saying on topics that our customers often mention, such as now that they have all of the insights from customer feedback, how can they effectively use them to actually make things happen in their organization? I don't actually know a lot about this topic, but I am really passionate about customer experience, and I actually would love to know myself, what are the 5 ways of influencing the leadership? So Lynn, what are the 5 areas you're planning to cover and why?
Yes, well, I've selected these here that you can see, speaking in your stakeholders' language, customer lifetime value, emphasizing strategic ROI, discovering patterns, and using Pareto Analysis. And it's important to speak your stakeholders' language when you're a voice of the customer leader, because it's your audience of managers in the company need to see voice of the customer as relevant to them. And a lot of times the data in and of itself somehow misses the mark. And so I'll show you how to make it more obvious to managers that you're speaking their language and that that's resonating with them. For customer lifetime value, this is a largely overlooked technique to help prioritize what you want to work on, or all of the things that you're finding from your voice of the customer insights. What should you focus on, and how can you use customer lifetime value to motivate managers to really take notice of it, to develop a conviction to make changes, and to maintain momentum in what they plan to do, so that they have the follow through that leads to the results that you really want your voice of the customer program to generate. The strategic ROI is really important for understanding the big picture of customer experience value. A lot of managers seem to focus on the finite costs and benefits, but there's a longer and bigger picture, longer time frame associated, we know, with the ROI of customer experience. And so I'll show you some ways to depict that. On the 4th one, telling your story of voice of the customer compellingly is much more possible when you're connecting the dots between different types of VOC insights, and that's understanding patterns. And then for Pareto Analysis, this helps you to do more with less, so putting your efforts on the critical issues that will get you further faster.
Great. let's get started. And just before we move on, I just wanted to mention, now that we have a few more people joined in, that if you have any questions, please type them in the question area, and we will address them at the end of the webinar. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's start with the first one: how to use stakeholder language.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, every manager has one thing in common. Money is the universal language that they understand because they're in charge of budgets. They're in charge of a certain amount of resources, and they have certain targets that they're responsible to meet financially or with those resources. And so money is their universal language. And anytime that we can transition our insights into how it affects revenue in terms of growth, churn of customers, and alliances and employees, as well as market share, that will help them to see the opportunity. Anytime that we can convey the relevance of our insights to margin or costs or profitability, that helps them to be motivated to expand their resources. And anytime that we can connect our insights to share of budget, meaning the volume that customers might be able to buy more going forward, each customer account buying more, or being able to upsell or cross-sell our product line with any account. Those are things that really get managers' attention and help them to take to heart your voice of the customer messages and make them part of what they care about day by day, and really help them to also walk the talk. So a couple of ways you can do this, and this is just a sampling. I'm going to show you kind of the tip of the iceberg, and there's all kinds of things that you can riff off of these ideas. But first of all, say for example, you know that the top two box of your voice of the customer data for any particular issue is a certain percent, maybe let's say 40% here. And so that's the big circle of VOC Insight A. If you were able to see any characterizations of who those customers are in your database, such as which accounts they are, or what type of industry or length of business you've had with them, you're able to quantify, at least with a guess, if not in actual accurate dollars, how much money those customers that answered that particular question that way represent. And so you can compare that with your bottom two box or any other part of the scale, or any other kind of group that you have identified in your customer data that represent a certain point of view. Now, when you're putting them side by side like that, and you're saying, this percentage of customers is at risk if we continue with the status quo, that will get managers' attention, because they'll realize, wow, that means that if we don't make a change from the status quo, we may have a hard time going forward, or we may really miss the opportunity to do things right at this critical juncture. Another way of looking at it is to take data that is static. For example, maybe you've been at an average of 8.1 for the past several quarters or something like this. A lot of managers will say, well, we're kind of in a safe zone. It looks good enough. We don't really have to make any changes. But in fact, you can say that by not changing this upward or downward, whatever the positive direction may be for that, we're actually tying up certain resources in our company on this static performance. And if we were to make a change, we could actually free up the resources that are associated with the ones the ones on the other end of the spectrum. So essentially, you're showing people an opportunity to free up resources and opportunity and future value to by addressing something that has been static, but it's just kind of a waste. The third thing is you can take an issue and either through qualitative analysis, or it could be even quantitative. So for example, that there's an index and then some key drivers of it, and then the corresponding factors to those key drivers. And if you're able to identify that this is a certain percentage of the customer base, this is another percentage of people associated with answering that question, and so forth, then you can help to see them, help to show them how much money is represented by each of those layers, and it helps them to feel like they're part of the decision making in terms of what part of this can we put our hands around, and how much can we make an improvement to our revenue margin or share of budget opportunities represented by that issue.
Cool.
So
And
I would recommend, yeah, go ahead.
A quick question. So when you talk about revenue at risk or money represented, am I understanding correctly that for a particular insight or topic where we know which customers are affected, you need to calculate their customer lifetime value and add those numbers up?
Well, it can be as simple as how much revenue do they represent, or how much of this particular product that they're buying. What's the average sales price for that product, and just talk about it for that one finite purchase. So you don't have to go into a huge amount of
future.
You can, ideally you would, but most of the time that's not very practical. So any quantification that is realistic can be useful.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. So another thing about your stakeholders' language is that every group in your company has their own jargon. For example, the things that finance talks about are a little different from the things that HR talks about. So you might want to listen to some of them. Maybe you can spend some time with them somehow, even just spending a little time in the hallways where they happen to be, or looking at some of their presentations that they do. You can pick out words that they use and what kinds of things that their performance is measured on, and what are their passions. So, for example, in IT, their language tends to be around system and data integrity, accessibility, security, uptime, redundancy, and compatibility. And so the notion there is that when you're looking at your voice of the customer insights and you're trying to get IT's attention, you might even sit with somebody from IT for a little bit, or have them come visit you and look at the data, and have them talk about the implications that they are sensing or that they know about with regard to this type of language. And that can help you to formulate a much better presentation, report, and dialogue with that particular stakeholder group. Now, one of the things I did this when I was leading customer experience at Applied Materials, I met with the various lines of business and every single functional area, and certain specialties within those, so that we could weave in our customer experience insights to the type of stuff that they were doing. So in terms of, say, HR, where they might be developing capabilities of our talent base, We looked for vignettes and certain case studies in the voice of the customer data collection, and we made a plan to weave those into the various courses and other capability development areas that they were pursuing that year. And then we also talked about what we might do in the upcoming year to integrate that further. So there are a variety of ways that a voice of the customer manager can make use of these language insights. But I also interviewed EMC about 2 years ago before they became part of Dell, and they were on my talk show, and they said that they regularly met with one of the business unit or functional area champions before they released their voice of the customer reports. And that would allow them to get those insights, as I just mentioned, and connect the dots between operational data and the customer experience insights, and to make a much more rich presentation, as well as recommendations for actionability. So when you're listening to your stakeholders' jargon, make sure that you're adjusting these lists as needed, because what I've shown you here as their language may differ for different groups, or they may have their more special terms that they use for your industry. And then, as I mentioned before, align what you do to what will resonate with them, and be bold in recommending actions in their terms. So for example, for human resources, you could present a finding such as 65% of customers are less than very satisfied with responsiveness to customer requests. At first glance, you might think, well, what does that have to do with HR? But in fact, you may realize in stepping back and looking at the data, or even talking to some of these champions, that this represents $800 million of revenue, and employee productivity is being slowed down because of rework and inquiries. Well, employee productivity is part of what HR cares about. And so this has implications for them in terms of talent development. So you could recommend that customer verbatims and vignettes get integrated into courses and workspaces like I did. And then you could also recommend that for succession planning, that there's a requirement to demonstrate a 20% cycle time improvement. Well, they may want to do something different, but that's okay. You put something out in front of them that now they can work with, and that's much easier than just leaving it blank and having them come up with it themselves. So I suggest that you experiment with these things, and make sure that you're always pointing out what's possible for them to lose by staying with the status quo. So that's usually what will motivate people. They know what kind of things might not help them meet their goals. They'll be more likely to act on those things, and that's what you want to do.
Yeah, I can imagine almost like templates. So once you've done your analysis, that for people who are responsible for taking actions, you could translate every month the insights into what actually matters to them.
I can imagine that too. That's a really good idea.
Cool. So yeah, second, customer lifetime value. I'm really excited about this one.
All right, so this is one of those topics that's a little bit scary for a lot of people. It seems really daunting. So the notion of it is that you are subtracting costs from revenue for every customer for the number of years that they have a relationship with your company. So essentially, it's cumulative profit. So the reason why it's hard for people to use this is mostly on the cost side, but on the revenue, there are many ways that we have upside One is that the same customers bought again, as opposed to having only new customers every day or every quarter. So repeat purchases, the price elasticity that a customer will have over time, that they might be less picky about price increases or about buying premium things because they have an ongoing relationship with you. The share of wallet that they might expand over time, upselling and cross-selling opportunities to get them to use more of your product line. And the word of mouth that your existing customers have in bringing new business to your company. These are all sources of revenue. So any of these, I would say, are fair game for picking out as an element of customer lifetime value. So you can look at customer lifetime value as the full equation and be completely accurate to the nth degree on monetary value, but it's very rare that people are actually using customer lifetime value in that hyper accurate way. Most of the time people are using it primarily to talk about revenue, either this quarter or for, say a 5-year span or something like that. As long as you've defined what your parameters are and what your assumptions are, and you've made that known to people, I think that is fair game. But anything that you see in this list here about ways that revenue might be affected by a voice of the customer insight are fair game for just putting a quantification on it, sharing what your parameters are, and then helping people to see this is what is at stake as an opportunity if we move forward with this particular action from the insight, or this is what's at stake as a risk to our business as we know it today. The second element here, of course, is costs. And there are so many things that affect costs of a customer. And one is, how much does it cost to acquire them in the first place? You've got all the sales collateral and conversations, and all of the efforts around getting them on board. Second, all of the costs of serving them, and that is for just daily management of their orders and delivery, as well as your tech support, customer support, and other things. Thirdly, we rarely take into account escalations, and there are certain customer segments or customer accounts that have more escalations than others, and that's something to take into consideration for how valuable certain customers are relative to others. Next, we have returns and remedies that are needed for those particular situations. Enticements. There are enticements such as the loyalty program or volume discounts, warranty extensions, and things like that that we sometimes invoke to maintain certain customers or to attract certain ones, or to make up for perhaps operational discrepancies that we've had. And then, of course, there's negative word of mouth, which is a cost. So certain customers that may be holding a grudge or have experienced something can actually be a further cost that we don't usually quantify or keep track of. But in fact, their negative word of mouth is a cost to our business. So anything in your voice of the customer insights that might impact any of these sources of costs is fair game for you to quantify as risk elements that your data represents, and a reason for managers to take particular action with those voice of the customer insights. Mm-hmm. Are you following me so far, Alyona?
I'm a little bit unclear on how the three parts relate to each other. But I'm also conscious of our time, so I don't want to ask you too many questions.
Right, okay. So the tricky part with really accurate customer lifetime value is assigning the costs to customers, because you have gross costs that are really visible, and then you have a lot of costs that are kind of spread out across customers, and you have a lot of costs that are a little bit invisible. And so getting down to the penny of what everybody is costing, it becomes really tricky. So that's why I think it's a better recommendation to be happy with doing it in a quick and dirty way, and don't worry about all of these assigning costs. Just use the first two columns here that you can draw upon to say, this group of customers represented by this answer to a voice of the customer question had, such and such number of escalations last year. Anything that you can tie like that would be a good use of lifetime value in helping to convey a story about your customer insights and a reason for the managers to pay attention, to do something about it. Yeah. So here's some examples where you might rank order the value of certain issues or certain segments of customers. And by rank ordering them like that, it makes it very clear to managers what they should focus on. Another way you can take the monetization of your customer insights is to compare the as is to the to be. So say, for example, right now the dark blue is the current state, but if we made a change and such and such number of customers were happy or unhappy, we could change it to the larger circle. Or vice versa. If we have something that needs to be reduced, it could be changed to the lower circle. And another way of conveying this pictorially is by having a horizontal line that is your baseline, and then you have bars going above the horizontal line, which shows it's above par, or bars going below, which mean it's below par. So I found that for business to business in particular, directional correctness is certainly sufficient. I know that in market research and voice of the customer, people do want to see statistical validity and a confidence level and things like that. But once you get beyond the fact that your survey data is in fact accurate and representative of the entire customer base, then you can take some liberties with quantifying the lifetime value or the monetary implications. And as long as you have been transparent in whatever assumptions and parameters that you're using behind those numbers, these kinds of pictorial representations are very effective in getting people's attention and action. So we'll move on to the third tool, which is strategic ROI, and related to what we have just covered. So financial ROI is simply the equation of the growth from an investment minus the cost divided by the cost. And if you want to put some numbers on that to just see how that works out, say for example, you can get $500 from an investment, and the investment actually costs $400 to get. So you would get $100 over $400, or 25% gain. Or say, for example, something is going to be 3 hours, but it used to be 4 hours. So this is a 1 hour savings, or 25% gain, reduction. So on financial ROI, the main points are that you have a finite time horizon, You're only looking at it for like right now or this quarter or this particular purchase in and of itself. And so it's a siloed scope. It doesn't necessarily take into account any of the other implications around it. Now, in real life, you have all kinds of factors that come into play with something, and nothing is really an island. Nothing is really a silo. And so strategic ROI takes into account the broader picture of your overall growth and your overall costs. And it's not always cut and dried, quantified in a specific number like positive 25% or negative 25%. It's usually more of a story. So you may have some quantification, but you're bringing to your manager's attention that not only is there a specific immediate financial implication, but there's a longer term play here. There's some peripheral advantages or disadvantages to either the status quo or the potential change that we have in mind to make. So here, I've just found it to be very useful, especially talking to higher level executives about the upside and the downside to specific courses of action as implied by voice of the customer insights. All right, for pattern discovery and telling the story of your voice of the customer compellingly, what you're really looking for is outliers, connections, and characterizations. So we've been talking about characterizing your data financially and in the language that people use. Here we're looking for patterns within the data itself in any one study that you do. And you can see that I've got a crosstab chart on the left-hand side. The most simple thing that people use is top box versus bottom box, but crosstabs I love because you can take the answers to one question on the left-hand side and the answers to another question on the top and compare. So I'm always looking for where's the littlest number, where's the smallest, where's the largest, and does that perhaps mean something? And by looking at all of your questions that way, you can start to put things together that wouldn't have been obvious to you in the traditional dashboards. I like scatter plots because you can see if there's certain outliers, like a little group of performers over here. You might want to evaluate those and see what's going on with that data, if there's something to be learned from it. Venn diagrams are where you have two concentric circles with a little bit of an overlap area. And you usually use that for comments, where you're finding the comments that are common or something that's common between two groups and what's not common. And then we need to be doing a lot more in voice of the customer. We're looking at data from different sources. So for example, you have your customer advisory board, you have your transaction survey, you have your other sources of insights from customers. And when we have put them side by side, certain questions that either go together or they may have a sequential nature in the actual customer journey, we're able to find a lot of things that we wouldn't have noticed otherwise, and that's really great for managers to see more about how they can run their business smarter. Of course, looking at data over time, looking for those trends, and comparing your internal data operationally, both what's going on in your own operations, what's going on with the customer behavior in your operations versus external data, such as their opinions and ratings and so forth.
I have a quick question, from Joanne Chang.
Yes.
And it's about the crosstab table. We also call them pivot tables.
Yes.
And she's asking, when you start slicing and dicing the data in this manner, what can happen is that your biggest number, for example, could be 80%, but when you look at the actual number of people, it would be only 3 out of 4. So that would be 75, sorry.
Yeah.
But the actual number is really tiny. Is there a minimum sample size per cell that should be used to make sure that you're looking at patterns that are actually reliable and not just anomalies?
Absolutely, and that's a really good point. I think stepping back from our desk and kind of looking at the whole business from a customer's viewpoint is really important. Like, if you were a customer, what would be significant to you? Or what is really meaningful in the big scope of things of how the business runs. Sometimes it's helpful to get to spend a little bit of time with some higher level managers to try to get a sense of where those cutoffs are, or sometimes you can just get it over time with experience. But certainly anything that's high or low in and of itself needs to be taken into a broader context, is what I'm trying to say. So there's not a specific number, but I think that if you look at the full picture, you can start to understand which ones you should ignore. Okay. Thanks. And of course, there are a number of data visualization tools on the market that can help to identify various patterns in your data that can tell a story. All right. Okay. So I think, Alyona, you have an example you'd like to share.
Yeah, so this is another way of spotting patterns in data, and really it's about answering the why question. So we're looking here at data from February 2017 and comparing it to data from March 2017. So the blue is the February and the orange is March. And what happened is that the score went up from February. The score was 0. Let's say it's an NPS score, and in March it went up and now 6.2. It's shown at the very bottom of the chart. And what actually happened here is that in the survey, in the Voice of Customer program for this particular company, they've asked, why did you give us this score? And Thematic was found themes such as efficiency, time, personability, information clarity, and so on. And we then calculated for every single theme in what customers are saying, what is the NPS of people who mentioned this particular theme in their response. And by taking into account the number of people who had this particular theme, we were able to calculate the impact. So what we're seeing here is low returns is something that was dragging the score down in March by -7 points. And this is something that people did not mention in February. But on the other hand, they did mention documents. As you can see, the documents blue bar is more negative, almost 10 impact of 10 points of the NPS. And this is what potentially would have caused the a lower score than in March.
Well, that's pretty neat. Most of the time, it would take you quite a long time to uncover that through the old-fashioned methods, but it's really great to see that that Thematic is able to uncover that so readily.
Yeah, so you could do it in an Excel spreadsheet also, It's just a couple of formulas, and we're actually sharing them on our website. So the key is how do you turn your free text customer responses into the themes, and this is something that we're helping with.
I've always felt like customer comments are so valuable and so underutilized. And it used to be that it just was almost impossible before we had technologies like this to make full use of them. So I'm just loving to see that people are embracing this.
Thank you.
The fifth tool, the final one, is Pareto Analysis, and that will help you to do more with less and to focus on critical issues. So the whole principle of Pareto is that 80% of something is caused by 20% of something. So if we were to tackle the 20% of the issues, we would actually see 80% gain. So that is a pretty good equation. So the critical factors here are that on the left axis, you'll see the frequency. So how often is this issue happening? On the right-hand axis, you're going to see the cumulative percent. So if you take, say, issue number 1, the dose was missed, plus issue number 2, the wrong time, and you add them together, you get 83 plus 92. Together, that makes a certain percentage of the total number of issues. So you can see that the red line here on the first bar, this one, 92, represents 20% of the total issues. And then together, these two bars, you can see from this dot, represents 40% of the issues. When you get to this one, it represents 60. And then up here, you're finally getting to the 80% cumulative cutoff. So if you were to work on these four vital issues, vital few, you could ignore the trivial many and see roughly 80% of your problem solved. So that is the idea behind Pareto analysis, and that can help you to do more with less and focus on your critical few issues. I just wanted to mention too that these types of techniques for taking a little different view of your work and quantifying things, connecting the dots, speaking in the language of stakeholders, making a compelling case to them, are all types of techniques that we also help you to do with various templates in our ClearAction value exchange, which is a great way for you to build your team's capabilities in all the areas that I've talked about today.
Yeah, and when I saw the slide, it reminded me on a case study we did with a company called Melodic. So just recently, so Melodic is an app that helps you learn how to play a musical instrument. And what they told us is that they've been discussing within their organization whether or not they should be including lessons of music theory, or it should be just a practical being able to actually play. What they did is they asked their customers again in an NPS survey, and they were surprised by just how many people mentioned that music theory matters to them. So not only it was it's not an unknown anymore. Now you have the data, but also these are the chart kind of showing the relative importance of things, just like in the Pareto analysis. And it would be interesting to draw the line and to find out whether music theory would fall into the 80% or the 20%.
You bet. That's pretty interesting. Well, I'm really happy to see that there's so many things we can do with customer comments to make them really stand out for our managers and to help them to know more diagnostically what they should do. It's really powerful.
Shall we turn to questions?
Absolutely.
One of the question is so something that we have assumed that organization already have, that organizations and participants into this webinar, they have already a voice of customer program implemented, but could you speak a little bit about how to actually implement this? One of the participants asked.
Okay, so how to implement voice of the customer to get started on it, you mean?
Yeah, and for example, how to choose the right partners to work with, and are there any case studies that you know of or can recommend for kind of getting started?
Yeah, I can simplify it to a couple of things. First of all, I think the best starting point is to make note of what your customers are already telling you. So if you do an inventory of ways that customers are already talking to your company, and an inventory of what how that's being captured or whether it could be captured, and if so, what are the primary themes that customers are telling you about, that can help you do two other really important steps. One is how quickly is it likely to be, are you likely to be able to make changes in those particular areas, and how quickly are forces happening in your industry on those particular type of themes. Now that can help you to guide your selection of a voice of the customer methodology in terms of, do we need to be asking our customers constantly about their view on these particular topics? Because if we can't make a change before we're asking them again, is it really necessary? So I think that just being more practical in terms of what makes sense to customers. Why are you asking me this again when you haven't even had a chance to make a change in it, or there's nothing that's changed it? So I think that looking at your methodology in terms of what you already have can be helpful that way. The second thing that people really overlook in setting up their voice of the customer is, for what customers are already telling you, who in your company needs to be taking action on that or following the trends? How would they should we be expecting them to absorb these customer insights and to make it part of their world? What kind of systematic cadence can we put on to make sure that we're getting follow through on those types of things? So pre-planning the type of actionability that you want your company to have on customer insights should be informed by data that you already have on hand. And then secondly, the resource that you go to for automating voice of the customer, or for developing your whole portfolio of customer listening posts and methods for understanding your customer's world, can be informed by just what I've described. And then finally, I think that looking at voice of the customer with the eye to becoming more smart about your customers than your competitors is the most important thing. If you are able to use voice of customer insights to make your whole business superior to your competitor's business, to be ahead of the game, then you'll be looking for these kinds of insights that tell a story. You'll be able to make these tools really valuable in compelling your company to rise above the fray, to be a leader in your industry. It's not going to happen automatically just by following the same thing that everyone's doing. It's not going to happen automatically by looking at index scores. But really, the whole idea of voice of the customer to me is that you are influencing your company to do things differently now than they were yesterday, so that your company is ahead of the curve. So it's probably a little bit different advice than you were looking for, but I think those are things that people need to be talking about more.
Yeah, And it ties in nicely into the tools that we've learned today to help you make a voice of customer program a success.
Right. Yeah. So bottom line is, don't just jump on the bandwagon. Do what makes sense for your customers. Honor what they've already told you. Realize that most of your job is not just collecting data, but or analyzing it, but rather most of your job is to influence your managers in the company to embrace the voice of the customer story and to up-level their game so that your company wins more business because of it.
What percentage of the time, this is another question that just came in, what percentage of the time would you recommend for somebody who works in a role responsible for voice of customer being spent on analyzing the data versus actually sharing it with others?
Well, I think I would go with the 80-20 rule there. Ideally, you would be spending 20% of your time collecting data and managing your vendors and so forth, and 80% of your time driving understanding and action, and weaving in the voice of the customer insights to all of the rituals in your company. Some people call them operating rhythms. I call them rituals, which are, your performance reviews, your employee onboarding and succession planning, your ops reviews and staff meetings and budget requests, and anything that you do in the company to run the business that really doesn't have anything to do with making or delivering the solution your customer's buying, but just has to do with managing the business. Voice of the customer needs to seep into all of those rituals in order for you to become a customer experience leader. And I do believe that the fiascos that we've witnessed from some unfortunate stories with companies in the past few years where something happened that was really embarrassing and got recorded on YouTube or something, and on the TV and incessantly. It's just really sad because all of the hard work that their customer experience teams were doing to drive, customer loyalty and positive word of mouth are kind of being shot in the foot by one or two or three managers or employees that made a decision that wasn't wise. So the more that you can be using your voice of the customer to weave it into the fabric of how you do business, which is all these rituals, the more you'll be setting up insurance against those kinds of little fiascos or great ones that could happen to anybody.
Wow, this is really profound. Thank you so much. I think it's such a good point, and it's so easy to get lost in the data, but it's really about making sure it's heard.
You bet.
All right. So thanks so much, everybody who joined us today. We hope you found this useful, and thank you so much, Lynn, for sharing with us your insights.
You're welcome. It's been my pleasure. Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.